I learned the truth on my wedding night, standing barefoot on cold tile, still wearing the pearls. At 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed with a bank alert I wasn't supposed to see, and the hallway clock kept ticking too loud. What should have happened didn't. He didn't speak. He didn't touch the light. He sat at the edge of the bed, adjusting a watch I'd never seen before, while the doors stayed half closed. People had authority here. His attorney had planned the week. His adult children chose the seating. The hotel manager nodded and looked away. I noticed the minibar receipt folded under the lamp, the ink still wet. I noticed the air conditioner stuck on heat. The betrayal was larger than one man, but I couldn't name it yet. I only understood that silence was expected from me, and it was being enforced politely. Then a second alert arrived. The second alert wasn't from the joint account. It was from a card I hadn't activated, tied to an account name that looked like mine, but wasn't. The message was plain. Withdrawal approved. Amount. Location. Time. 11:43 p.m. The hotel name was spelled wrong by one letter, like the bank had copied it from a messy merchant file. I kept the phone in my palm and didn't angle the screen toward him. The bedspread had that stiff, tucked-in look like nobody was meant to sleep there. One robe hung in the closet, turned inside out, the belt trailing the carpet. The pearls felt heavier than they had an hour ago. I slid them off and set them on the dresser beside the lamp. One bead rolled until it touched the base with a quiet click. He stood up and opened the connecting door to the suite next door. "Just a minute," he said. It wasn't a request. It was the same tone his attorney used at the rehearsal dinner when I asked where the certificate would be filed. Calm. Final. Like my job was to stop asking. Through the gap, I saw a strip of light and the corner of a sitting room. A legal pad lay on a coffee table with a pen resting across it, uncapped. I heard a woman's laugh, low and tired, like someone who'd been waiting. Then the door clicked shut. I stayed where I was. The air conditioner rattled, stuck on heat. The hallway clock kept ticking too loud. A minibar receipt sat folded under the lamp, ink still dark and fresh. The room smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old cologne. At 11:47 p.m., there was a knock on the connecting door. A man's voice said, "Howard." My husband answered, without opening it all the way. "It's done," Howard said. "Then we can start." There was a pause. I heard a chair scrape. Paper shifted. A folder, maybe two. Their voices lowered until I could only catch a few words. Trust, schedule, signing. I'd told myself this marriage would be simple. He was 72. He moved slowly. He had a tremor in his left hand. He tried to hide by keeping it in his pocket. I had seen the house on the coast, the neat statements, the careful way his children spoke about protecting him. But nothing about this sounded careful. I walked to the desk by the window. Outside, the parking lot was wet from earlier rain, reflecting orange streetlights. A welcome packet sat under a glass paperweight. My name was printed beside his, bold and official, as if ink could create safety. At 11:52 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Not money this time. A calendar invite appeared. Estate review, initial. Location, conference room B. Time, Monday 9 a.m. Sender, Howard. I stared at the accept, maybe decline buttons. I didn't press anything. I took a screenshot, then another that showed the email address and the timestamp. My thumb moved like it had practice. In the bathroom, I turned the faucet on and let the water run until it went cold. The mirror fogged at the edges. I washed my face slowly and dried my hands on a towel folded into a perfect triangle, untouched. When I came out, the connecting door was open again. My husband stood in the doorway, blocking the view, one hand on the frame. "We should sleep," he said. I nodded once. I left my phone face down on the dresser, then picked it up and turned off lock screen previews so alerts wouldn't show. 3 taps. No hesitation. I memorized the steps without thinking. He turned away first. I lay on my side of the bed, still in my dress, and stared at the ceiling until 12:18 a.m. when a final alert arrived. "New document shared with you." It wasn't signed yet, and it had a deadline. By morning, the room looked ordinary again. Sunlight came through the sheer curtains. The clock had stopped ticking sometime after 3 a.m., frozen at 12:41. Someone had turned the air conditioner down. The minibar receipt was gone. At 7:08 a.m., my husband's phone vibrated on the nightstand. He didn't wake. It kept buzzing in short bursts, the way reminders do when someone ignores them. I watched his hand twitch once and settle. The watch was gone. I showered and dressed quietly. In the mirror, the place where the pearls had rested on my collarbone was faintly red. I put on a sweater with pockets deep enough to hide my phone and left the suite without waking him. Downstairs, the breakfast room was already busy. His daughter sat near the window, scrolling on her tablet, a coffee untouched beside her. She looked up when she saw me, smiled the way people do when they've already agreed on something. "Big day?" she said. I nodded. The chair I pulled out wobbled, one leg shorter than the others. I adjusted it with my foot until it steadied. At 7:31 a.m., my phone chimed. Another calendar update. Same meeting. Same room. Now marked confirmed. I didn't accept it. I didn't decline. I took another screenshot and slid the phone back into my pocket. This wasn't new. It only felt new because it was finally obvious. There had been the house tour months earlier when I was asked to wait in the car while they checked the paperwork. There was the dinner where his son spoke about continuity and never once said my name. The birthday when the gift was already opened before I arrived, the card signed without me. At the time, each moment had passed with a polite explanation attached. Timing, tradition, stress. Now, they lined up. At 8:14 a.m., Howard appeared in the lobby. He didn't look surprised to see me. He nodded once and glanced at his watch. "We'll start on time," he said. He didn't say my name either. We walked to conference room B together. The hallway carpet was patterned to hide stains. A framed print hung crooked near the door. Inside, the table was already set with folders stacked at each place. Mine was thinner. Howard took the seat at the head. My husband sat to his right. His children filled the other chairs. There was one empty spot to my left. Howard opened his folder. "We're here to review the trust amendments finalized last week." Finalized. My husband didn't look at me. He adjusted his cuff, the tremor gone. Howard spoke about timelines and protections. He slid papers across the table. No one asked if I'd seen them before. At 9:19 a.m., my phone vibrated again. A message from my sister-in-law. "This is for the best. Please don't make this harder." I left it unread. Howard paused when he reached my place setting. "You can observe," he said. "We'll explain as needed." Observe. Like a tour. He continued, describing provisions that moved assets into entities I'd never heard named. Dates. Clauses. Exceptions. My husband nodded along, occasionally adding a detail, his voice steady. At 9:42 a.m., Howard said, "We'll need signatures by Friday." No one looked at me. That was the moment neutrality disappeared. My husband spoke then, still not turning my way. "If there are questions," he said, "they can go through you?" Howard. Questions about my own marriage. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask for clarification. I took my phone out and placed it face up on the table. I let the screen light with the unread message, the calendar invite stacked, the document share with its deadline circled in red. Howard noticed. His eyes flicked down and back up. He cleared his throat and kept going. When the meeting ended, everyone stood at once. Chairs scraped, papers slid into briefcases. His daughter hugged him and kissed his cheek. His son clapped Howard on the shoulder. My husband finally looked at me. "We'll talk later," he said. I nodded. I picked up my folder and felt how light it was. In the hallway, I stepped aside and opened a note on my phone. I titled it with the date. I listed times, names, exact phrases. I saved it. Then I emailed myself the screenshots from the night before, subject line blank. By noon, I had called a different attorney. By 2:03 p.m., I had a checklist. By evening, there was a new folder on my phone. It wasn't hidden. It didn't need to be. At 9:11 p.m., my husband asked why I was quiet. I said nothing. The line was crossed on Thursday at 2:11 p.m. I was standing in the grocery store aisle, deciding between two identical jars of sauce, when my phone buzzed with a fraud alert. It listed a transfer I didn't recognize, scheduled for the following morning. The amount was precise. The destination account had a name that mirrored mine again, one letter off. The note field read, "Household adjustment." I put one jar back. I left the other in my cart. I didn't respond to the alert. I took a screenshot. Then I opened the bank app and scrolled slowly past the balances I'd memorized to the activity page. The transfer was pending. Authorized. My name appeared in the approval line, typed, not signed. At the checkout, the card reader chirped twice before accepting my payment. The receipt printed long and thin. I folded it and tucked it into my pocket with the phone. Outside, it had started to drizzle, the kind that doesn't commit to rain. I sat in the car until the fog cleared from the windshield. That evening, my husband said nothing about the transfer. He ate quietly, cut his food into small squares, and watched the news with the volume too low. The remote was upside down on the armrest. At 7:52 p.m., Howard emailed the group. Reminder, signatures due by Friday COB. I didn't reply. On Friday morning, I moved my toothbrush to the guest bathroom. I changed the side of the bed. I slept on without explanation. I stopped asking what time he'd be home. When messages came in, I left them unread until morning. I ate standing at the counter instead of sitting at the table. Coffee tasted sharper. I finished a full cup for the first time in weeks. At 10:06 a.m., my husband said, "There's no transfer." He said it casually, as if he were correcting the weather report. I nodded once. I didn't look up from the sink. I rinsed my mug and set it upside down on the towel to dry. At 1:38 p.m., Howard called. "Just to be clear," he said, "no accounts have been opened in your name." "Okay," I said. He sounded relieved by my tone. He repeated himself, slower, as if clarity required volume. "Nothing has been opened. There are no adjustments pending." I thanked him. After the call, I saved the voicemail summary and added the time to my note. I took a photo of the sink where the mug sat, water beading at the rim, for no reason that felt urgent then. By Sunday night, I had printed statements and laid them out on the dining table. The wood had a scratch near the corner that caught the light. I lined the pages so the dates matched. I used a paperclip that was bent out of shape and wouldn't hold more than 3 sheets. I made it work anyway. Monday came with a mediation notice. Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. Same building, different room. At the session, my husband arrived early. He wore the watch again. Howard greeted him by name and shook his hand. When it was my turn, Howard smiled and said, "We'll keep this efficient." My husband spoke first. "I've never authorized any transfer without my wife present. He said, and there are no duplicate accounts. He didn't look at me. Later, when the mediator asked about household finances, my husband added, everything runs through counsel. No exceptions. I wrote the statements down exactly as he said them. I underlined never once and stopped. The mediator asked for documentation. Howard promised to provide it. We scheduled a follow-up for Friday. The room had a ticking clock that ran fast, gaining a minute every hour. I noticed it because I had nothing else to do. On the way out, my husband reached for my elbow and missed. We'll sort this, he said. I didn't answer. I fixed the porch light that evening, tightening the bulb until it stopped flickering. I slept through the night for the first time since the wedding. At 11:09 p.m., an email arrived with attachments. The subject line read, as discussed. I saved them to the folder. I didn't open them yet. The deadline was still Friday, and he stopped asking. Friday morning was quiet in a way that felt intentional. The house settled as I moved through it, boards creaking in familiar places. I made coffee at 6:42 a.m. and drank it by the window, watching a delivery truck idle across the street. The porch light I'd fixed stayed steady. At 8:55 a.m., we were seated in the mediation room. The table was narrower than the last one, the surface nicked and dull. A box of tissues sat unopened in the center. The mediator adjusted her glasses and asked for the documents Howard had promised. Howard slid a folder forward. He spoke confidently. As I said earlier, there were no duplicate accounts opened and no transfers authorized without counsel. My husband nodded. Correct, he said. That never happened. The mediator opened the folder and paused. She turned a page, then another. She held one sheet up and asked, "Can you explain this authorization?" It was a bank form with a timestamp, Thursday, 2:11 p.m. The account name was the one-letter variation. The approval line showed my husband's name, typed, followed by a digital credential issued to his firm. Attached was an email thread confirming the setup, sent from his address, forwarded to Howard, replied to by Howard with, "Proceed." No one spoke. The mediator flipped to the next page. A second authorization appeared, dated 2 days earlier. The note field reading, "Household adjustment." My husband shifted in his chair. The watch caught the light. Howard cleared his throat. There may be a misunderstanding. The mediator raised a hand and kept reading. She read aloud the exact language my husband had used on Monday. "I've never authorized any transfer without my wife present." She looked up. "This authorization does not include your wife." My husband opened his mouth and closed it. Howard leaned forward, then back. The mediator asked for a timeline. I slid my folder across the table without a word. It contained screenshots with timestamps, calendar invites, the voicemail summary, and the pending transfer alert from the grocery store aisle. The mediator stacked the papers neatly. "We'll need to suspend this process," she said, "and notify the court." No one argued. The consequences didn't arrive with noise. They arrived as emails and holds and notices. Accounts froze pending review. The deadline for signatures lapsed without comment. A temporary order restricted further movement of funds. Howard stopped calling. When he did write, his messages were careful and short. At home, my husband packed a bag, without asking which room I wanted. He left on a Tuesday at 4:17 p.m., taking the watch with him and leaving the remote upside down. The house felt larger. I changed the sheets and put the clean towels back in the hall closet, folded the right way. A week later, a courier delivered an envelope that required a signature. Inside were copies of filings and a schedule. The language was dry. The outcomes were specific. I put the papers in the same folder and slid it onto the shelf with the cookbooks. People notice things without me pointing them out. His daughter stopped texting. His son sent one message asking for clarity and didn't follow up. The hotel refunded the minibar charge to the card I hadn't activated. On Saturday morning, I went to the grocery store again. I bought the same sauce. The receipt printed cleanly. I paid attention to nothing else. By the end of the month, the routines had changed. I slept on the same side of the bed every night. I ate at the table again. The porch light stayed fixed. When my phone buzzed, it was usually a shipping update or a calendar reminder I'd set myself. Once at a coffee shop, I saw my husband across the room. He was talking to someone I didn't recognize, gesturing with empty hands. I waited until my drink was ready, took it, and left. Tomorrow will be ordinary. That's enough. After he left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt unused, like a room that had been closed for years and finally opened. I moved through it slowly, noticing things that had been there all along. The hinge on the pantry door squeaked, only if you open it halfway. The drawer beside the stove stuck unless you lifted it slightly. The thermostat reset itself at midnight, no matter what temperature you chose. On Wednesday at 10:21 a.m., I received an email from the bank confirming the review status. It wasn't an apology. It was a process update. 3 bullet points. 1 attachment. A reference number. I saved it to the same folder and archived the message. The sound it made when it disappeared from my inbox was softer than I expected. The attorney I'd hired sent a brief note later that afternoon. No action required today. That sentence became familiar. I printed it and placed it under a magnet on the fridge. It stayed there until Sunday, when I replaced it with a grocery list. Friends ask careful questions. How are you doing? Are you okay? I answered with logistics. I'm busy this week. I have a call scheduled. I'm handling paperwork. The questions stopped changing after that. On Friday, a courier came again. This time there was no signature required. The envelope was thinner. Inside was confirmation that the duplicate account had been closed and flagged. The wording was neutral. Irregular activity. Internal review. Preventative measures. I noticed the date on the letter was Tuesday, 2 days before it arrived. Time moved differently now. I folded the letter and put it in the folder without rereading it. The folder had started to bow at the edges. I replaced the paperclip with a binder clip that snapped shut cleanly. At 7:03 p.m. that evening, my husband texted, 1 sentence. Can we talk tomorrow? I left it unread. By Saturday morning, the house needed air. I opened the windows and let the noise in. A lawnmower somewhere down the block. A dog barking twice and stopping. The wind pushed the curtains against the wall, then let them fall back into place. I wiped down the counters and noticed a stain near the sink I'd never seen before. It came off with a little pressure. At 11:46 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. Howard's name appeared, then disappeared when I didn't answer. He left a message that tried to sound casual. He mentioned misunderstandings. He said things had moved quickly. He suggested a call to clear the air. I saved the voicemail. I didn't respond. The court notice arrived the following Monday. It outlined next steps and dates. No adjectives. No judgment. Just a calendar laid out in black and white. I added the dates to my phone, set reminders, and placed the letter on the kitchen table until I'd finished reading it twice. Then I filed it. On Tuesday, I changed the locks. The locksmith arrived at 9:18 a.m. He wore a cap with a local company logo and apologized for being late even though he wasn't. He worked methodically, laying each old lock on a towel before replacing it. The metal made a dull sound when it touched the counter. When he finished, he handed me 3 new keys on a ring that felt heavier than the old one. "Test them," he said. I did. Each door opened smoothly. That afternoon, I moved my husband's remaining things into 2 boxes. Not many items. A pair of shoes by the back door, a jacket in the hall closet, a framed photo on the bookshelf that I turned face down before packing. I labeled the boxes with a marker and stacked them near the entryway. At 6:40 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A message from his daughter. "We're all confused. This didn't need to happen." I read it once. I put the phone down and finished making dinner. The legal process continued without drama. Documents moved from one office to another. Notices were issued. Responses were filed. Each step came with a date and a reference number. The authority that had once felt distant now operated on rules that didn't change based on tone. During one call, an assistant asked me to confirm my address. She spelled my name correctly on the first try. I noticed. By the end of the second week, the house had settled into a new rhythm. I woke up earlier. I stopped checking my phone first thing. I took the long way to the grocery store and parked under the same tree every time because it shaded the windshield in the afternoon. One morning, while sorting mail, I found an envelope addressed to both of us. It had been forwarded. Inside was a refund check from the hotel. The amount matched the minibar charge exactly. I endorsed it and deposited it into my account. The funds cleared the next day. At 2:58 p.m., my attorney called. "They're asking for a continuance," she said. "We're declining." I said okay. She added, "You don't need to be present at the next hearing." I wrote the time down anyway. On Thursday evening, I finally opened the attachments Howard had sent weeks earlier. They were drafts, incomplete, comments in the margins that hadn't been removed. One note read, "Confirm spouse awareness," followed by "proceed anyway." I closed the file and didn't save it. That night, I slept with the window open. The sound of traffic faded after midnight. I woke once, checked the time, and went back to sleep without replaying anything. The first real consequence arrived quietly. A letter from the firm, addressed to my husband, arrived at the house by mistake. It outlined internal steps and compliance reviews. It used careful language. It did not accuse. It did not explain. I left it unopened and forwarded it to the address on file with a note that said, "Wrong recipient." There was no reply. By the third week, people stopped asking for updates. The story had moved on without me. I noticed the absence of messages more than the messages themselves. On a Sunday afternoon, I fixed the loose hinge on the pantry door. It took 5 minutes, and a screwdriver I borrowed from a neighbor months earlier and never returned. I walked it back across the street and left it on his porch. He waved through the window and went back to whatever he was doing. Later that day, I sat at the table and went through the folder one last time. I checked dates. I checked names. I checked that everything was in order. Then I closed it and placed it on the highest shelf in the hall closet behind the winter coats. It stayed there. The next time I saw my husband was at a pharmacy on a Tuesday at 4:12 p.m. We stood 2 aisles apart. He picked up cough drops. I picked up dish soap. We made eye contact briefly, the way strangers do when they realize they recognize each other. He nodded. I nodded back. Neither of us stopped. That evening, I cooked a simple meal and ate it at the table. I washed the dishes and put them away while they were still warm. I set my phone to charge in the other room and didn't check it again until morning. There were still dates ahead, still procedures, still forms to file. But the urgency had drained out of them. They were tasks now, not threats. The next day's reminder went off at 9 a.m. I acknowledged it and moved on to the next thing. Life didn't reset. It continued, and that was enough. The last loose end didn't arrive as paperwork. It arrived as silence that stayed too long. By the fourth week, my phone had learned my habits. It stopped lighting up for things that didn't matter. Most mornings, it stayed dark until after breakfast. On Thursday at 8:19 a.m., an email came through from the court clerk confirming receipt of the final filing. No issues noted. No further action required at this time. I read it once and archived it without flagging. The house sounded different when it rained. Water moved through the gutters in a steady line instead of spilling over the corner like it used to. I'd had that fixed the previous Saturday, standing on the driveway while the repairman explained what had been clogged. Leaves, a tennis ball, things that didn't belong there. That afternoon, I found the spare key my husband used to keep in the junk drawer. It was taped to an old warranty card. The tape yellowed at the edges. I held it for a moment, then dropped it into a bowl of screws and nails in the garage. Metal against metal. It disappeared without ceremony. At 3:47 p.m., my attorney sent a short message. Everything is proceeding as expected. I didn't reply. There was nothing to add. I went out for coffee later than usual. The shop was quieter in the afternoons. A woman ahead of me argued gently about milk alternatives. The barista smiled and remade the drink without comment. When it was my turn, I ordered the same thing I always did. The cup was warm through the sleeve. I sat by the window and watched people pass without wondering where they were going. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store and bought a new light bulb for the porch, even though the old one still worked. The replacement felt heavier in my hand. I screwed it in just before dusk and waited until it got dark to see it come on. It did. That night, I slept without setting an alarm. In the morning, I folded laundry and noticed there were fewer socks to match now. The machine finished its cycle and chimed once. I moved the clothes to the dryer and wiped the rim the way I always had. Some habits stayed. At noon, I passed the hall closet and didn't look up at the shelf where the folder sat. I didn't need to. The future didn't announce itself. It showed up as space, as quiet afternoons, as plans made without checking anyone else's calendar. When the day ended, I locked the door, turned off the light, and went to bed. Nothing followed me,